Hello, everybody, and welcome to Write Something Weird. I'm Sophie Stern, a paranormal romance author in Kansas City, and I'm here today with a wonderful guest, Lori Scoby. Hi, Lori.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm better now that I get to see you. Really
Oh, I'm
excited
excited.
you could come talk about writing with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I think it's so cool that you have a podcast and you do all this stuff.
Oh, wait, you're so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we met pretty recently. We are new friends, and we met in Lawrence at a book event. I think we both tend to do book events for many reasons. They're fun. We get to connect with other authors. We get to connect with readers. But what's your favorite thing about book events?
Oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many. I think one is just literally just connecting with other authors and learning about their process. And I think connecting with readers too, because I think it's interesting to see what all people are reading and what is kind of trending. Like I know book talk is a huge thing right now, and so
Yeah.
romance and romantasy is huge. But it's also interesting to see I've had a bunch of readers be like, I really like all the book talk craze and everything. But most of it does focus on romance. And so I feel
Yeah.
like we act like it accidentally excludes a lot of readers. And I'm like, wait, it should be more diverse
Yeah.
genre, right?
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Yeah, and I think the conversations you get to have at book events, whether it's at a library like we were or any other type of event, you kind of discover that readers read lots of things, not just romance.
For sure. And I think because romance has taken off, it's just, and this is speaking as someone who grew up on romance, loves romance. I'll
Yeah,
be the first one at all the movies and readings, but I think it is one of the easier formulas to write when it comes to writing. So it's
interesting.
person meets person, they fall in love, but there has to be something that kind of makes it to where it's more, it's harder for them to fall in love. But when it comes
Hmm.
to other genres, I think sometimes there's less of a formula. And so I'm like,
Interesting.
it's just kind of interesting to see how different books are written.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really fun to see like everyone's process because you're right. Everybody has a different way that they approach writing. And I think it's the same for just attending events in general. Like everyone has a different reason that they go. Everyone has a different way that they prepare. Were you nervous before your first book event, or were you pretty ready?
I was so nervous. I feel like I sweat through my clothes and my friend, I was like, "Hey, can you bring extra deodorant for me?" Because
Oh
it's
my goodness.
I think my first book event was the Heartland Book Festival, and so
Hmm.
that one was really cool because it was at the library that I used to work at, and so
Yeah.
just seeing some old coworkers, but also it was a free event. It was also the same weekend as Boozy, or not? Is it the Boozy
Yeah,
Book?
yeah.
But there was a pretty good amount of attendance, and I think a lot of it was because it was very accessible financially wise, and so. I think when you go to these author events, you almost kind of have to prepare to sell yourself and your book in a way. And for
Hmm.
me, it's a little uncomfortable because it's just kind of I don't know. I've had people come up and just be like, "So why should I buy your book?" And I'm just like, like being put on the spot like that.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of figuring out how can my book or how or will it connect to other people and going
Hmm.
from that angle instead of trying to sell yourself, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. And I think that's really interesting to bring up, right? Like when you are selling a book in person, you kind of are selling not just yourself, but like an experience, right? Like you're selling your time with the reader and you're it's kind of interesting because you're cultivating this like momentary relationship and it's not easy. You're right. And I think a lot of us like we pour our hearts into our stories and people are like, so what's your book about? And at least for me, I'm like, what? I don't know. I don't know what that
Exactly.
book's about.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same. I'm always like, hold on, let me pull up the description I
Yeah.
wrote for Amazon or whatever it is, it does feel a bit awkward. And I think like for my book, because it honestly is pretty much a memoir of like my
Mhm.
life, but told
Yeah.
through the lens of a fictional adult love story. And so it feels kind of weird to talk about, and it also depends on what space you're in, right? So
Yeah.
like um Kansas City is like really great about doing these like huge AAPI events, and so like I think I feel more comfortable in those spaces, like because I'm Chinese,
Yeah.
but also like I've gotten to meet quite a huge adoptee population.
Oh,
And
cool.
so a lot of them are also, they tend to be younger. And so it's interesting talking to them about like kind of where they're at in their adoption
Yeah.
journey. And then just reflecting on where I was at when I was that young too.
Absolutely. That's interesting. So it's not just like general readers that you're meeting, you're also like getting to connect with the adoptee community and people who are looking for that kind of story, and
Yeah.
looking for that opportunity to see themselves.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So speaking of your book, what's your book about?
So it is a fictional story, love story written in based in Kansas City because that's where I live. It's basically my adoption story. So Leo Sanders is basically me, Lori Scoby, and he has going through the recent loss of his late adoptive mother, and so it brings up a lot of grief, and it also makes him think about his biological family. And so then he ends up meeting Sophie, and she's the facilitator of the adoptee group, and they end up falling in love, but also within that, he ends up like falling in love with the culture that he never really learned about, and then feeling like he can exist in both spaces of being American enough, but also Asian enough.
It just gave me goosebumps. I love that you did this, and I love that you wrote this story. I can tell, I read your book. Thank you. I loved it. It
Oh,
was so
thank
good,
you.
but I can tell you poured so much of yourself into it. And as a reader, I really felt like the emotions and the passion and the love, but also just like the curiosity and openness. And I think you did a really good job of bringing those characters to life and just letting them be and have these experiences. Um, what made you decide to write this story, your story? Was it just bubbling up inside of you, or did you kind of wrestle with that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, originally, I got my undergrad in creative writing at UMKC, and so like since I was little, like I would write all these little stories about animals, unicorns, like all these little
Mm,
magical things. But throughout my whole life, I have only heard like my adoption story through the voices of my adoptive parents, and
okay.
so it wasn't until I think it was June 2022 that I wanted to start to kind of be more a part of the Asian community. And so that's when I
Yeah.
started to learn to use chopsticks, and choosing chopsticks. A lot of it is part of my journey of figuring out what does being Asian enough look like and feel
Mm,
like for me, especially like growing up in a pretty like white community.
mm,
So a lot of it was kind of like, okay, if I were to tell my adoption story, which I've tried to do it memoir style so many times, and it's just, I think like it's harder because a lot of it is based on facts, not feelings,
mm.
because I was 5 months old when I was adopted,
Interesting.
so I was really little.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, what if we tell it with the facts and a love story? And kind of the love story is really just like Sophie is who I am now and who like I've gotten to heal with and
Yeah.
come to like a lot of peace about my adoption, whereas Leo was a lot of like my childhood, like into high school. And so it's kind of a love story about my whole adoption as well. And then the two pieces finally like reconciling together. And so I was like, okay, I've heard my story so many times through other people's
Mm-hmm.
voices. What would it sound like through mine?
I love that. I like that you took your power back. I like that
Yeah.
you like took hold and you were like, actually, like this is how I want to share this experience with readers. And you wrapped it in this beautiful love story, which
Thanks.
is really incredible. And you talk a lot about family in your book. Like family's a big thing, obviously. But did you always know that let me rephrase. When you picked your themes, did you write the story and you were like, oh, here's a theme of family relationships. Here's a theme of curiosity. Here's this theme, or did you just write it and you were like, wow.
Kind of wrote it. I didn't realize kind of all of these themes until like as they were coming along. Like I knew it was going
Hmm.
to be adoptee focused because honestly, there's not a lot of fictional stories that involve
Hmm.
adoptees. Usually they are memoirs, which is amazing.
Hmm.
But I'm like, okay, so how do we bring adoptees into the fictional world because they're in the
Yeah.
real world? But I think a lot of it just kind of came together. I did my whole story arc that we were taught in college, and so I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is gonna be the climax. This is gonna be like the resolution. This is how it's gonna start. But yeah, I think it just kind of came together on its own, and then when I was able to kind of like step back, because I've reread my book so many times, like finding new things to edit, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there are quite a few themes in there. I know grief is a huge theme.
Yeah.
So like Leo, I lost my mom to breast cancer as well, and so I think that grief also triggered a lot of his adoption grief and mine too, as well.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like I think in the book it talks about how he's like, it doesn't feel fair that I lost both moms, and so him just kind of reflecting on who he is, like he's 22 at the time, and
Yeah.
just kind of having a what is my life moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's super not fair. I agree. And I think it's two things that you said that I thought are really interesting. One, you're right. There's not a lot of adoptees in fiction. Like, there's just not. And I'm not sure if you and I talked about this at the book signing, but I'm not adopted, but I have six adopted siblings.
Oh, okay.
So I'm the oldest of nine, and I also have found that there's not a lot of fiction with adopted kids
Mhm.
or foster kids, and a couple of my siblings were also in foster care, and so they still have relationships with their biological families, and you don't find that a lot in fiction.
You
And,
really don't. And I feel like when you do, it's like think of like the movie Annie, right? So
mhm,
like she is pretty much portrayed as the victim, which I mean she did experience a lot of child abuse and neglect, but
yeah,
usually when adoptees are in fictional stories, like it's always someone coming to save them, and
yep,
that's not necessarily what it is to be adopted. Like there is
yeah,
a lot of saviorism themes with
yes,
adoption. It's like, oh, you can't, especially internationals or
mhm,
even with foster care. It's like you came from these like very meek, humble, like bad situations. Now you're in a better life. And it's like, that can be true. But also the grief that like someone experiences when they're not with their biological
yeah,
family is huge. And it's not talked about because a lot of people are like, you're just in such a better place now. And it's like, but you have to honor the grief process.
yeah,
And I think that's what
mhm,
gets skipped over a lot, and that's what creates a lot of feelings that adoptees have. And they're just kind of repressed because they're taught to just be grateful for where they're at now.
yeah. I mean, you're so right. And it's really interesting. So, one of my sisters, she graduated from high school, and for the graduation party we had, both of her families got to come.
Oh,
So, her
awesome.
biological family, her adopted family, and everybody came, and she was like, these are my two moms. And it was, it's a pretty healthy situation from my perspective.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people don't understand that desire to have those connections, right?
Yeah.
Like you're right, grief is such a great word because there's a lot of loss
Hmm.
and questions of what if or what does this look like or the question of
Hmm.
identity and where do I fit in? And I think a lot of times when people bring up like diversity in storytelling, they're just talking about skin color, but it's like
Hmm.
actually we need adoptees also in our stories,
Yeah.
and we need people who have health problems or um, there's I'm really sorry about your mom, by the way.
Thank
And but so my mom also had breast cancer, and people who are dealing with cancer and books.
you. Yeah.
Like, because I remember when my mom got diagnosed and I was like, where's my story about this, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I navigate this as a daughter, right? Like, how do I support her? And for so many life lessons, we always like to turn to fiction.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think as independent authors, I think we have this really cool chance to write that. And you
Yeah.
wrote this really cool story.
Thank
You did
you.
it. I think it's really amazing that you are shaping the future of fiction. I think you've done a wonderful job with your story, and I love that you poured so much of yourself into it.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
So, pivoting a little, what was the most interesting thing about writing your book? Was it the process itself or the way people received it?
I think for me it was the process. Like I didn't think I would have such visceral like reactions to writing it and like reflecting on going back to like mental spaces I haven't been in such a long time. And so like there would be some nights where like I don't know about you, but sometimes when I get anxious, like my fingertips just get really cold. And so then
Yeah.
like it's harder to type and then
Mhm.
like my knee is already bouncing and I'm like, well, I got anxiety anyways, but it was
Oh,
like harder to go to sleep. And so then I kind of had to set some boundaries. Like it's like we need to cut off writing around like 7 or 8 p.m. because otherwise you're just too wired to like keep going.
yeah.
And so I was like, I didn't really anticipate it to impact me like that. And
Mhm.
so a little bit of a spoiler, but I did leave it with a big cliffhanger. And so a lot of people are like, are you gonna write a sequel? And I was like, I don't know, honestly. I was like, the experience that he's about to have is something I haven't had. And so I just don't
Mhm.
like because the first one was so genuine and close to me, like
Yeah.
I just don't know if I could replicate that. But also another adoptee friend, she pointed out that like, this could also be your way of healing, like kind of taking control. And I was like, this is true. This is true. But right now, I think like with everything going on in my life, I'm just like, I don't know that I have the mental capacity to return to that story at that point. Um, I was kind of surprised. Like, I think a lot of people received it really well, and I was
Mhm.
kind of worried, especially how like my friends in the white community would receive it, because I was like, I'm not definitely not bashing like white people or anything, but I think it just like
That's okay.
it
This is a safe space.
I think it's just kind of like, okay, what role do white people tend to play in adoption community? And so a lot of
Yep.
it is like, well, because of just natural privileges, like they do have the
Mhm.
means to adopt. And so that kind of comes into like the white saviorism. When I
Yep.
started kind of this adoption journey, I learned so much more about adoption that I like had no idea. Like I didn't know that well, there are actually a few things I didn't know. So sorry, little side detour.
That's
So in
fine.
2018, I actually got to go back to China with my parents, like my adoptive parents. And so they always said, like, when you get your bachelor's, we can go to China. So we did. And I met this one girl who was, she was a part of the one child
Mhm.
era, same as me. But she was a girl and her mom chose to keep her. But what I didn't know is that in China at that time, if you chose to keep your second child, you got taxed and fined on it every single year. And so, like, out of her salary. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting. And then I also learned from other adoptees and just like joining adoptee groups that a lot of adoptions definitely were not consensual. Like, babies were taken in the middle of the night and left somewhere if they weren't like being sold, which sounds so terrible, but if they weren't doing well in other adoptions, they would be transported to another one. And then I also learned that the adoption papers that adoptive parents are given don't always match the ones that the agencies keep.
Mhm.
And so, in order to do that, you have to contact your agency. You have to get those papers, which usually you probably have to pay for your own papers, and then you have to pay for a DNA kit. And so, whenever people are like, "Oh, have you thought about finding your family?" It's like I have, but there's also that huge financial burden too.
Yeah.
And so these are all things that like I was learning, and I was like, wow. I was like, it is just, it's not black and white at all. It's a lot of gray.
And I think that's really important to bring up because adoption is very traumatic for
Hmm.
everybody, right? Like, and I think you're right. There is like this white savior idea of it being like a beautiful thing and you're rescuing this kid and all of these things. And that's not really the case all the time. And it's interesting. I was talking to this person and I said, "Hey, my sister's adopted."
Hmm.
And the person I was talking to was white and she went, "Oh, was the birth mom on drugs?" And I was
Yeah.
like, what a weird fucking question. Like, why did
Yeah.
you ask me that? I was pissed and I never spoke to her again because I
Hmm.
thought that's, first off, that's rude. Secondly, that's presumptuous.
Yeah.
Thirdly, like, that's not the situation at all. And this particular sister has, like I said, access to both families. And
Yeah.
our shared mother, like, is very, like, nurturing of that and okay with
Mhm.
that. But it's not that black and white.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's not that black and white. It's a very complicated situation.
Yeah. Oh, that is
Sorry,
so
I got
wild.
riled up.
No, you're good. You're good. Because I think a lot of people do think like, oh, if you are not able to keep your kids, something must have terrible happened to you, or
Yeah,
you're a terrible person. But
yeah,
I think parenthood is just so much more gray than all of that, right? Because
yeah.
like you have to think about, I mean, think of the world that we live in today. Like probably when our parents or our parents' parents were our age, they were able to get a house, pay for college, like, and only have one person work for a
Yes.
four member
Hmm.
family. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, like you can have a household that makes like 120, but they're still scraping by because
Yes.
inflation rates.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, it's not that simple.
I think a lot of things are not that simple. And you're told,
100%.
yeah. And I think the other thing is our generation, we have the internet, right? So you have that access to other adoptees and you have that access to be like, what did you go through? Here's what I've gone through. What should
Hmm.
I do? Where should I start? Like, do I want to look for like my birth family and what does that entail? Like you were saying, like it's a complicated process. It's an expensive
Hmm.
process. Whereas I think back in like the 90s, people like they didn't have that access. So you might
Hmm.
not know anyone who was adopted, or it might be like a secret. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, the internet does. I feel like as much as it like can be unhealthy, it also connects so many people, especially like
Yeah.
people who have grown up in more rural areas or maybe like places where their adoptive parents really don't want to address the adoption or they don't want them to
Yeah.
have contact with their birth parents. And so I feel like in some ways it can be a safe place. You just have to be
Yeah.
careful.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of being a human, whether it's, just being a person or, being a writer is so isolating sometimes. Like having that community in every aspect, I think is so important. And being able to have that community of, like other adoptees, like even me, like I'm like, cool, I have six adopted siblings. I don't know what it's like to be adopted. I haven't gone through that. Or
Hmm.
even like my parents, like they have adopted children, but they haven't themselves been adopted. So
Right.
they don't know what it feels like. And so I'm sure for you, like having other people who do know what it feels like, it's probably pretty nice.
It is really nice. And I think there's this like, I mean, Leo has a dark sense of humor and that definitely comes from me. And so he'll make some like fucked up adoption jokes. And I'm like, these are all things me and my friends have talked about. And it's like,
Yeah,
you kind of gotta laugh through the dark stuff sometimes because it's the
I think
only
so
way
too.
to shed light on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question for you is you're very genuine and you're a very genuine person. And I
Thank
felt that right away when we met. I just felt like, oh, you're like a real person. Like I could get real with you
you.
and say what's on my mind. And that really translates into your writing. Um, I don't think you hold back. I think you put yourself out there as an artist. So, what advice would you give to other writers who are holding back, who are scared to just let themselves go?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think finding finding a group of people who will support you, but also be
Mhm.
honest with you. And so I think it depends on like what you're writing. Like if you're writing from other people's experiences, like you really want to get like those sensitivity writers to check in. You
Mhm.
want to like do all those things. But I think if they're holding back just because they're scared to put their work out there, it is really scary because you're sharing a
Yeah.
part of yourself and your creativity. But I would say, I would say do it, but maybe manage your expectations of what do you want to come from this? So for me, I
Yeah.
was like, this book is not going to change my life. Like, it's not going to, as much as I love for it to be a Netflix show, if you're listening, Netflix, or a movie,
Netflix,
um,
roll up.
right? I was like, I want it to change other people's lives, even if it makes them feel less alone. And so I was like, I don't need to be this multi-million dollar author, and that's probably not going to happen realistically. But if it can make someone feel less alone, feel more Asian enough, or whatever, then that was the goal.
I
And so I
love
think
that.
figuring out what do you want from being an author and what do you hope to gain
Yes.
from your story, and then reflecting on that and then just doing it.
Amazing. And you did it. And
What
you
did
created a
you?
story. You look at you. You created this story where people they can feel like they're enough. And I just think that's really amazing. And I'm really happy I met you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy I met you too.
So, well, Lori, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time today. And happy writing.
Thank you. You too. It's so nice to meet you.